And folks, I'm going to handle letting in people, so just leave that to me. Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. I am delighted to have Harold Nelson here answering the questions. He's been quietly listening to everything that we've been doing. And this time, we get to talk to him and we get to ask him questions. So I'm delighted. So welcome, Harold.
Thank you.
So Harold, this is a very unusual experience to watch all these people discussing your book systematically. So what do you think of this entire, our doing these meetups on your book? Please take your time, and whatever comments you have, we would appreciate that. Go ahead.
Wait, did I write a book? Don't tell me the end, okay? Don't tell me the end. So, first of all, I want to thank you for all the hosting that you've done and for allowing me this extra time, for everybody's patience while I'm working through my little opera here. And I really appreciate that. Appreciate Robert stepping in, making me look good at the last minute again. So I really, really appreciate that. Appreciate everybody's patience in this. So the thing that stood out for me, there was two things. One was that I got to observe a phenomenal group working, and I got to feed some of my own interests at the same time. So the thing that really was exciting for me is there's an old definition of conversation that's turning in the same place with others. And I really like that notion, and I got to see it in play, that people were turning in the same place, respectfully, very cautiously, very consciously, reflectively, in the same place, focused on the same thing. And that was great. That was a great experience. And it's like watching, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Tuckman model of team formation, but it was like I'd see this forming, storming, norming had already taken place. And it's like, if I was going to do a design project, I would love to have this group now come together in dialogue and begin to perform a design, because you're ready. I've had people tell me, yeah, we have a team put together. When one CEO said, you got to meet my team. So the team filed in, and they were introducing themselves to one another. And I said, you don't have a team here. You're a long ways away from a team. But you guys are definitely a team, and it was great to watch you. And the respectfulness that you had, not just for one another, but for the ideas and for the focus. I really liked that. And of course, being the author, it's kind of nerve-wracking. And I'm used to being in an academic setting where people bring their daggers and whatever to have their conversations. And it was really nice not to have that kind of an intensity and that kind of negativeness. So it was working with professionals instead of academics, and I really liked that. One of the things that I wanted the book to do is to sort of introduce professionals to these ideas more than just the academics, which were the usual crowd that I would get stuck with. So that was all really nice, and not just nice, it was exemplary. Really did a good job, made me feel great. And I could avoid being the helicopter author. I didn't have to hover. I could finally relax and just sit back and say, okay, this is going into the world, and this is the way it's living out its life. And I know I've heard people say this as designers, that you have to let go. You don't own it anymore. And I really got that. I don't own. This is whatever it is in the world on its own, doing whatever it's going to do on its own. And it was actually nice to see how people were using the ideas and applying them in their work and their daily lives. So that was great. It wasn't another just academic hot bubble blown up with words. It is a dense book. People tell me that all the time. And I think you all handled that very, very well. It had to be a dense book because it was going into an environment and it had to survive in this academic and other environment. It was going to be challenged and to not get dismissed out of hand because it was really a different approach to a lot of these things. Not to get dismissed out of hand, you really had to lay the groundwork carefully. You really had to cover all the different aspects as possible. So that's why the book was dense, and I appreciated people saying in the beginning, oh God, this is kind of dense and this is hard, but people stayed with it. And then I could begin to see some of the building on the previous work, and that was very gratifying. Of course, 7 times you have to read this now? People said 7 times. So this is just the first time. And for me, besides avoiding being the helicopter author and avoiding intervention, just, no, that's not what I meant. No, no. I didn't do that. That's another great thing about the book in this kind of setting is like, if I have it in a class, as an instructor professor, people expect me to say, no, this is the way it should be reviewed. This is the way it should. I didn't have to do that. And it was okay. And it felt okay. However, it will be on the final exam, so don't relax.
Wonderful, wonderful. So Harold, what I want to do is, in some ways, you have known all these people, these friends of mine. Okay, these are friends of mine. And especially people who have been commenting a lot on your book. I want to give them a chance of interacting with you a little bit and then ask you a question. So I'm going to start with Joe, Marissa, Evanique, David, and Mike, and I'll keep adding people. So you are welcome to chat, talk about whatever your impressions and ask whatever questions. If you have asked a question before, like, is there only one solution or any other question that was there on the list, please at the end bring that up, but you can bring up some other question if you want, make comments if you want. You have 2-3 minutes to talk, and we will go there, and I'll keep on adding more people, and then I will open it up for questions for everybody, including and Jeng definitely. So we're going to start with Joe, Maritza, and actually Joe, Maritza, Jeng, Evanique, David R, and Mike A next. So Joe, what do you have to say to Harold, and what would you like to ask him?
Well, first I want to say thank you for joining us each week. As Shrikant has mentioned, we've covered several books here, and not many times have the authors shown up. To be fair, I think we've covered the Bible and the Tao Te Ching, so I mean,
they were all dead.
Yeah, exactly. I think they're excused. No, I thank you again for writing this book and joining us each week, and it's been really to have the author here is actually it's a really special treat. I've gotten a lot out of the book. It was very difficult to go through. It was as you had mentioned already, that it's a dense piece of work, but it makes you work, and I think that that's really what has been one of the most beneficial things for me personally, is that it's really made me think about design and not necessarily look at it as a process. And I think that that's an important distinction. Because so many times today that actually design is really thought of as a process. So actually, that would be one of my questions, though, why can't design be a process? I mean, I have other questions. I have a lot of other questions that I could ask, but that's an interesting one. And because I've read in certain journals that how design.
Let Howard answer.
Okay.
Thanks.
So the question was, why can't design be a process? And for me, it can't. It is. And I think I'm understanding what you're saying, but people come back and say, you can't make it a method or you can't make it a recipe. And that's not the same thing as having process. And I had a friend, colleague, who actually got a Nobel for reintroducing the idea of the arrow of time to science and to the world, because people forget that you can't unlight a match. And that sounds strange, but people do this all the time. They're talking about circular, they draw circles and processes. No, time moves forward, things transform, and design does that. And if you've made anything ever in your life, piece of pottery, whatever, you know that you've had to go through a process of transforming materials, ideas. You go through a process. Doesn't have to be a recipe, but you do go through stages and phases. And I think, I may be assuming too much, but I think at least that's the arguments I get from people is, oh no, you can't put it in, a recipe. Nope, it's not. But it is definitely stages and phases. Matter has to go through certain processes with you in order for something to be created in the end. And like I say, doubters, I tell them to unlight a match and then come back and talk to me about the arrow of time. And it's something that designers have to live with, is you can't go back to original conditions, especially when you're working with people. You work with people or you do something, you've taken their resources, you've raised expectations, you've done something, you don't get to go back to the original state. You're at a different place, and that's where you start to go from there. So did that answer, Joe?
Wonderful.
It did, thank you.
Next up is going to be Maritza, followed by Cheng. Maritza, what do you have to say? And what question would you like to ask? You've already asked a question, so you can repeat the question about the one solution.
So, I have to say, for me, strangely, I didn't find the book to be overly taxing. I will acknowledge that, it's dense. I understand that, but to me, it seemed that it was written to encompass as broad an audience as possible. I feel like I almost was able to take almost a whimsical approach to reading it, because the hard work was already there for me. I'm obviously not an architect, right? not a designer by trade. What I enjoyed most about reading this book was how it can be applied to so many things. And I like the careful way that we were shown that these elements don't require to exist solely in the design process. I love the idea of remembering that.
Sorry, I think Maritza is having an internet issue. Let's go with Zheng. Maritza will come back. Zheng, go ahead.
Hi, Howard. Yeah.
Hi, Zheng.
Yeah, this is a great adventure. I think I joined a lot of 5-2 Living Ideas, learned a lot. And this is the first time I actually participate with presenting. And because I'm the only field architect around here in the group. Yeah. And I learned a lot through that. And I think I benefit maybe the most because as a professional architect, it's really helped me to get much deeper with the process. My question is, I think you mentioned about you're in the academy, group of people, and I'm in the professional group. Do you feel, I personally feel there's a big gap between the academy and professional practice. It seems you mentioned the real, the ideal, and the truth. It seems the academic deal with more the ideal and the practical practice more the real. And it seems nobody really care too much about ideal anymore. So, so I just want to see, you know, what's your opinion? I really think there need more interaction between the academy and the professional practice to update the professional with more new knowledge, deeper theory, and also connect the academy with more what's going on in the real world. I think that will help so much better for both sides. I see a big gaps, you know, like even architect and contractor, there's a big gap too. So there's always a big gap.
No, I've never experienced that. So anyway, this is very timely in a lot of ways. I just made a presentation to an association of India architects, and I talked about something about this. I think, and this is true for a lot of the fields of design, for me, and it was like for architecture. Architecture, you can practice as a scientist, or you can practice as an artist, or you can practice as a designer, and you don't get penalized for any of it. So you can practice as an applied science, or as a practical art, or as a designer. And so what I would promote is that designers, architects, everybody that says that they are designers or they've been told they're designers need to think about what they're immersed in as a sort of a setting for how they do their work. So I would push, and I've been pushing this notion of design as a third culture, and I'm really serious about that because like academics, almost all the academics I know in design are in the science domain. And in like PhDs, for instance, when I did my PhD, I was forced to do research. And when I've worked with PhD students around the world, and they're very frustrated and they want to do a new health system and education system, but they're being forced to do research. And they don't want to research, they want to design. And the process isn't there for them to design at any kind of higher level of intellectual development. So, and all the reward systems, everything are in place to support people who engage or say they're doing design. They're not always doing good design, but they're doing design. And that's how you get promoted at universities. That's how you get more money, is you do design, even if it's bad social design, you're doing design. How do you find a place to do scholarship in design? And where would like architects or anybody else go to advance their own scholarship, their own understanding of design at a deeper level that wasn't art or wasn't science? Like people, we have starchitects, they're called, who create buildings where people have to dwell inside of sculptures. Or there is the machine for living, like the famous Swiss French architect Le Corbusier's buildings are machines for living, so people dwell inside of machines. It's until people sort of can get, and especially the professionals and in their educational training, and that can get out of this notion that they have to be in science, they have to be in research to be taken seriously. Then of course, for the architects, and a lot of them get captured with the whole art side, which means that it's how does it look? What is its form? What's its aesthetic? Not its design, not anything deeper. And it's very visual. All of our journals, everything, award systems, everything is about how does it look? How does it look in the photograph? When you look at our journals, that's, you know, the critiques, everything about how is it looking? So get caught in those worlds, and you filter people in training and that in schools for the ones who are going to be the engineers or the artists, and you reward them for that, but not for being designers, not for being real, true designers. And so I would say, yeah, architects need to have a deeper understanding. So do all designers. I mean, my trigger was I was being prepared to take over this big firm in Colorado as the designer. And there's 2 projects that came in. And I was doing what was called programming, or the design brief for it. One was for a new city hall for Colorado Springs, and one was for a new clinic in Wyoming. And in both cases, it turned out I didn't think a building was the answer. What these people wanted was not, a building might be a part of it, but it was not about governance. It wasn't about health. And so it was a much bigger deal than architects can handle comfortably. You do need people who can do buildings, certainly, but you have to be doing the right thing for the right reasons. And that wasn't the case for, and I find that for a lot of professions, medicine, education, but a lot of them can't get out of the kind of constraints that they're in. And even if they discover what I've been taught to give as a solution isn't the right thing. So what do I do? And so, of course, I had a big question and I went to Berkeley. That's where you go when you have big questions.
Wonderful. Harold, I want to ask a follow-up question.
Yeah.
Zheng's PowerPoints were priceless for me.
Yeah.
To actually go through the book. I think they helped a lot of people. But what was your reaction to the PowerPoints, use of PowerPoints here?
Yeah, I wish I would have written that book. That was good. I could understand what was going on. And, it was right, she cut right to the heart of it. And I really appreciate it. And hers balanced with Maurice's poetry, the aesthetic. I don't get many settings where the book is approached from this kind of poetic aesthetic. And Zheng was very sort of, straightforward and no nonsense. And this is what was going. She got to the heart of it. And I love that balance. It was great.
Wonderful. Talking of Maritza's poetry, Maritza, you're next.
Yeah, I feel like this book afforded me the option to be more poetic. I, in general, tend to be slightly more objective and serious, but I don't know, something about this book, I was far more inclined to be a little bit more subjective. Well, actually, I made the conscious decision at the very beginning. And when I say the beginning, I actually read the fundamentals first. I didn't start with the first page. But in reading those 8 fundamentals, I made the decision to view this from the perspective of a designer who's not a designer by trade. So I took up Shrikant's, his statement that we are, man is a design animal. I took that mantle up and I took it very seriously. And as such, I ended up viewing the book, I think, almost honorably, slightly tangential to the way many people took the book, because I was looking at it from a perspective of how would one apply this to one's culture, one's community, as opposed to how do I work this within a project. Speaking of that, in the book, a few times we speak about the one perfect solution and how it doesn't exist. And to me, I saw that very, very clearly. But I did find that throughout our sessions here, many people question that a little more. And so I learned that it is very almost innate to our current society to seek that one perfect solution. So the question I wanted to ask of you was, if you were asked how to help a community avoid that, what would your words of wisdom be for us?
So that's a part of the unlearning, and the notion that we live in a determinate world, or just the assumption people have. The answer is at the end of the book. We just have to figure out what the answer is. Or we just have to do the formula. Or we just have to observe. And the right answer reveals itself. But if you're in an indeterminate world, which is what designers live in, are indeterminate. There's no given. So you have to figure out then, how do you take action, knowing that you don't have a predetermined outcome? And that's scary. It takes courage, but acknowledge that there is such a thing as free will, and that there is free design. And when you listen to people, or you listen to them very carefully, they behave or act as if there are laws of human behavior, and there are laws that will dictate what should happen. And I can read this in papers every day, formal academic papers, in informal journal articles. People assume that you have to just get a leverage on the law of behavior, and then you can get people to the right place. Now you can, it's true. One of the most popular classes in Stanford is, how do you change behavior in people so they will buy stuff, or they will, it's the whole online high techs. How do you get them to click and buy and do things? Very popular. And you can make people do that. And they've done it. They've addicted people on things. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's the right thing, or that's the right outcome. You got an outcome you can control, you can dictate. But what's the right one? What do you want? What's best for them? What's on their best best outcomes? So, given that we're in an indeterminate world, and so for me, for instance, the inquiry, one of the steps in inquiry is not research, but it's search. How do you engage in search? And that's a very different sort of way of thinking. How do we come to places where we make decisions and choices? How do we come to a place where we say, I think this is the right place to be for the right reasons, for the right people at the right time. So instead of a right answer, it's for the right people at the right time, in the right place, for the right reasons, for the right benefit. So there's a lot of rights for it, but it's for that ultimate particular. And that takes judgment, it takes courage, it takes a lot of things. And it's not just you on your own. You're doing this with people, and you're working in this kind of, it's not, I don't necessarily like the term collaboration so much. My Scandinavian friends live and die by that notion, but it's like, it's an entanglement in systems, in complex systems. You get these entanglements of things that are immensely complex and rich. No one thing is not indistinct from everything else. It's just this beautiful entanglement. And if you live in the real world with real people, you understand what entanglements are. Because even having something like a simple conversation involves a lot of entanglement. And if you're going to do things with clients, decision makers, all the rest of them, and something's going to come out, you're going to be working in a complex entanglement. And so for designers, I think it's just that we've been sort of caught up in this notion of determinism, or whatever, which is on the art side may be more, express your feelings, or the science side, do what's true. And it's a different sort of place to be. It's like, how do you search for the right thing to do for the right people at the right time, etc. And that's a different kind of process. And we don't have that in our educational systems and in our professional systems so much. And we don't have that in the way we reward people and hold them with some kind of esteem so much. So.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Howard. Next up, I'm going to first call on people who have contributed a lot to talk about if they want to say anything to Howard and then ask a question. You don't have to ask a question if you don't want to, but anything that you want to say. So I'm going to start with David R., Evanique, Mike A., Charlie, and Becky next. David R.
So Howard, I want to say I really enjoyed reading your book. Didn't think of it that way, but I've been a designer for many years, probably 30, 40 years, but not in architecture. And even though I sensed and got the impression a lot of people reflected as your book was focused on architecture, I found it to be actually very useful in the technical design projects that I worked on, in the creation of new functional things. So I really did like that. The one aspect that I enjoyed as I read your book was being able to reflect on my own personal experiences and relate that as I was reading through your concepts and ideas that you were expressing in various chapters. And then during some of our meetups, I think some of the people in the group struggled a little bit with your book because they didn't have that experience to reflect back on. And I don't know if you would consider maybe in a future edition of the book, including real life examples that people could kind of relate to and, share an experience that they may not have had personally, but they can relate to it by, reading the examples and the design, the implementation of the design concept that you might be, working on in a particular chapter. And I guess the question I have for you is, how do we take these ideas, which are very broad and encompassing in your book, and bring that to the next generation of designers to get them to think in a larger, more holistic approach and not be focused on implementing or executing specific ideas or specific techniques that they may have been, the flavor of the day, or whatever you want to call it, as we've gone through, various forms of design work. And I've seen programs and projects fail because they just blindly wanted to apply the new ideas without really taking that step back that I saw in your book, which is it relevant to the design that you're working on? And if it's not, then it shouldn't be part of the design. And you need to be able to bring the different elements together and not optimize them as individuals, but bring them together synergistically so that they all interact and move the design further forward. So I guess that's the question I would ask you.
That's a tough question. Have you got another one? No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. It's actually a good question for me right now. I'm working with people on the design of a new school of design proposal. I have a prospectus and things in place and basic design. And some of the design, a big chunk of it comes from the fact that I believe in this notion of a third culture, that it's not a science or an art, but it's its own tradition. But a part of it was what you had talked about, of examples, for instance, that people ask me a lot all the time. What are examples? And I'm always really, really reluctant to say what an example would be for one of the ideas I'm talking about. because I mean, there's a lot of professions that use case studies as part of their educational process, management, health, law. I've had to do case studies in law. And what happens is people are looking for those case studies for something to replicate. They want something to follow. Walk into a group at a corporation and they say, we want to be like Apple. What does that mean? You want to round the corners on everything that you make? That's not design at Apple. I know that for sure. But you have to be really careful because people will take, at least in our culture, will take a case study or an example as the thing to copy, not as something that expresses a deeper principle. And that's the piece that it's really difficult to get people to understand and appreciate. I had people very angry at me because I couldn't or wouldn't give examples because I knew they would go off and say, and this is the way to do it. No, that's not what the whole idea was. In your world, there's certain things that will come out. So for example, one example is that I had a dear friend who was a psychiatrist and he was in the health field, very well known. And he created a seed. He designed a seed of an idea, a new idea about health. And what he did was he created what's now one of the largest programs in the United Nations called the Healthy Cities Movement. And started kind of in more northern hemisphere, but now it's much larger in the southern hemisphere. And it's thousands of countries or hundreds of countries and thousands and thousands of people involved in this. And what they've been able to do is to take a seed, a principle, and it gets expressed in their own particular environments and context. And his notion fundamentally was that health is more than doctors and medicine. Health is something that's much deeper. And of course, he had whole principles about this. So in Denmark, health would mean parkways and bikeways. And in a Central American country, it would mean transparency in the way that the money was managed in government. And there was, the expressions for this fundamental idea about what health was totally different in every place. Now, if he would have told people, and I have a lot of friends, colleagues who would go around and tell people, yeah, green space is the big thing. That's what you need for health. That's what you got to have. And everybody go out and try to replicate green space. And it may be for certain places, that's a good idea, but not every place and not every time. So the idea that occurred to me, I don't know how many of you have pilot license, flown or anything, but good for you. It's learning to fly is a very complex, complicated, demanding thing. And I love their schools because what they would do, and I have I've run into this a lot. Somebody will come into a course or a class and say, well, I'm an action person. I want to take action. I don't want to spend a lot of time, learning about stuff. I'm an action person. I've got to take action. So nobody's going to give you the keys to the jet because you attended a weekend workshop on flying jets. Nobody's going to do that. It's not going to happen. So the great thing about the flight schools is they have ground school, and then they have the school where you're in simulations, and that where you're learning to do things experientially. And then you have a point where you go out what they call, you begin to fly with an instructor, somebody that's telling you, well, why the hell do you do that? You shouldn't, easy on that, back off. And then you catch air and you're on your own and you solo. So it seemed to me that this is a perfect sort of way of getting people into design, to include both the scholarly and the experiential side of learning, and you get to exercise and practice. So my response for people, what is the best example of this in play is, why don't you take this principle and you design something, and we'll talk about it as you go through it, and you'll be learning. And that's an experiential piece. And that's your example. As you struggle and you go through the design process with this principle, trying to take these things into account, and somebody is sitting in the other seat saying, yeah, okay, have you thought about this? I don't know if any of you have read The Reflective Practitioner by Donald Schoen, but it's sort of that kind of thing, is how do you become reflective? The world is going to be speaking back to you as you're trying to design and do things. So how do you take that into account, get into the conversation, reflect on it, and learn from that? And that's totally different from what you get from a case study. A case study is supposed to be like that. A case study is something you go through and you're supposed to experience kind of what the other person experienced. And then you're supposed to catch what they did and why they did, not copy, but you catch why they made those judgments, why they did what they were doing. It's not what happens, unfortunately, to a large degree. So anyway.
Excellent. Thank you, Howard. Next up is going to be Evanique, followed by Mike. Evanique.
Hi, Howard. First of all, thank you for endeavoring to write this book. I know that putting all the knowledge, like putting knowledge that you have in the design and putting it in a book and making it for a wide audience is not easy at all. So I appreciate what you did. Appreciate you sitting in on these meetups and, you know, listening to what everybody has to say and taking it in, and especially your beautiful marks at the beginning of this meetup about, you know, how easy it was. So, I mean, really a great appreciation for what you do, especially as a person that does not have a design background, that does not have an architectural background. I don't want to say I found this book to be difficult, but I'll say it. I found the book to be difficult, not because you made it that way, but because I did not have a design background. So it was harder for me, but I think I knew that going in. But I'm so glad that I read this book because it helped me think out things in my life, and it helped me see what design truly is, and to have a better understanding of something new. So it really did help me stretch my mind, and really challenged me to really stretch my mind and to grasp new concepts and to try to understand them rather than dismissing something because I don't understand what it is. So thank you for that. My question for you is, what did you want for non-designers like myself to get out of this book? What takeaway would you want for people who doesn't have a background in design?
Sure. The book wasn't meant to be for architects, actually. I mean, it had to come through, of course, because I spent more time becoming an architect than doctors spend becoming general practitioners. So it's an investment. But like people have told me off and on over the years, that form of education for architects is one of the best forms of education ever. It's just wasted on architects. And that's I've run across people doing very interesting things all over the world, nothing to do with architecture. And they started as architects. And dear friends like Russ Akoff and others, they were architects originally. And it's that grounding and understanding of what it's necessary to make something real in the world, in a complex world, that is so important. And I think people caught this notion that you're a designer. Once you say you're a designer, you're a designer because you've taken a position. And as you become a designer, you need to behave as a designer. So as you start to design your careers and your lives and whatever, you're designing. So you have to design because you said you're going to be a designer. And one of the things that may come up later, but I'll bring it up now. It's, I call it capacitation. When I was in electronics, kind of a rocket scientist, there was this little electronic component called a capacitor. And what that capacitor did is you could charge it with voltage and it would hold it. And then you could use that voltage wherever you wanted to get that capacitor to do work. So what we need to do is to think about, we become capacitated as, we don't learn, we're not taught, we're not all those things. We're capacitated as designers. We get that potential to be a designer. And you don't start off as a designer. I mean, you don't go through, that's one of the worst possible things that schools do, is you go through 4 years or something, here's a paper, now you are one. No, that's just the first step, if at all. You start off, we all start off not knowing. We start off as apprentices and we go through this process of developing and working, and it's a lifelong process. And for me, the ideal is to, one along the way, is for people to get to the point where they're scholar practitioners. So they can practice and they're scholars, and it's integrated, Sophia. But that doesn't happen by you getting a piece of paper after 3 or 4 years and you're done and you're out. And that people get that idea. It's like, okay, I'm finished. I got my classes in, I'm done. I'm an architect or whatever, doctor. It's lifelong. You're constantly working on developing and expanding your abilities and your capabilities. And but we start someplace. So when you say you're not a designer, well, as soon as you say you are. You may be an apprentice. Okay, from there on, then you're on that track. And you are acting as a designer as you're going through all the stages and phases of development. So the masons that did the stone masons that did the Gothic cathedrals and that had this marvelous system process where you would go through stages and phases of development and you'd be identified with a piece of equipment that you used at that stage. So we have the sayings nowadays are, you being straight with me? That comes from a certain piece of equipment that could give you a straight line. Are you on the level? That's another piece of equipment. So you were identified by the kind of technologies, and it was a personal development. You developed as this master craftsman by mastering the equipment, but also yourself. And you would pass through these stages of personal development. Unfortunately, we lose that, of course, in education. Nobody pays much attention to your personal development or anything at that level getting through school. But anyway, for Ebony, when you say, I wasn't a designer, well, okay. But as soon as you state that you are and you step into that place, then you are. Yes. And in order to move beyond that, you have to design. And you have to learn how to design. And you have to learn how to design better. And it's never going to end, which is great. That's part of why I was attracted to architecture, is that people don't let you do important things unless you're really old. They used to say in science, if not finished with your best work at 23, you're done. You're not going to build and get the Nobel or anything. Okay. Architects, old people, 60, 70. That's when you're just getting the best. Don't volunteer for anything, Robert.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Harold. Now I'm going to take a question from CJ, the man who is not here, but who is responsible for actually making this series happen and doing dozens of meetups on your book, getting lots of people excited about it, including myself. So his question is, in the design way, I read that the way to build one's facility for good judgment making is first experience in complex design situations, and secondly, engagement with the wonderfully comprehensive taxonomy of judgment in chapter 8 of the design way. How else might a student of design strengthen their judgment making skills?
So again, that goes back, and the reason I got sick was I thought I was going to miss his question. So anyway, it didn't work. The idea of judgment making, there's a lot of different kinds of judgment, but it's getting used to the idea, again, that the answer isn't at the back of the book. And the answer comes to you in different ways. So like the designers, we have this notion of when we've worked with something and we've struggled with it and it's very complex and we've brought in all this information, and suddenly you get this insight. You get, aha. And it makes sense. You get a little something that has unity to it. And it has, well, that's an unconscious judgment call. And your unconscious didn't ask you permission or didn't ask questions from you or anything. It just said, how about this? And it made this judgment call for you. And said, hey, that looks like something I can work with. Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm. So it goes from the easy, well, for some people, easy of learning to ride the bike and not fall over and not have to think about it all the time. But there's all sorts of levels. It's like the first time I went to Australia and they were stupid enough to give me a car and they drive on the wrong side. What the hell, who'd have thought a country like that would drive on the wrong side? So not wanting to wreck the car, I learned to drive on the wrong side of the car, out road after a while. And okay, and then I didn't have to think about it so much. I didn't have to worry, which was I going to get. So I got back to Seattle and I was driving back from the airport, and to my horror, I found myself driving on the wrong side of the damn road. So I had to stop and sort of bring all of that judgment, incidental judgments, back to the surface. And I had to start making judgments as I was going consciously so that I can let it go then back down and become subconscious. And then there's a lot of other times that you can sort of put yourself in a position in design of understanding that there's not a right or wrong way. There's not a true or false way. This is how you do it and why you do that. So then you have to learn things about what I call the bottom turtle. What's your fundamental basic value system? What is it that you believe in at its very bottom? And then you make judgments off of that. Okay. So then there's a lot of other things you can learn in order that you can act with some confidence in a situation where there is no given answer. There are only consequences. There's no right or wrong. There's only consequences to what you're doing.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Mike A, followed by Charlie. Mike.
Yeah, Harold, I was really thrilled at the beginning, your opening comments when you said that you looked at us like a team. because I felt the same way. I would actually come every week and I'd see you in that box and I would think of you as like the GM or the owner, and Shrikant is the field manager, and the rest of us took our own places. And I began to expect the contributions from everyone to be in line with what I had gotten from them in the past. It came from, it was almost circular. And I began to expect it every week, which was great. I haven't felt part of a team in a long time. And your work, it was difficult at first for me personally. And I know some other people here, we had to apply some rigor to get through it. And we did. And I felt like we kind of, got to the way forward, again, collectively as a team, which I really appreciated. On a personal note, what you and your book did for me is you reconnected me with my past. A lot of my contributions, I talked about my dad being a tool and die maker and designing and producing things in the 60s. And my brother is a manufacturer today using mostly computer controlled machinery. And each week as I went through a different chapter, as I became more confident with the material, I would kick it around with him. And we would take your work and we would throw it back to the 60s and talk about what it would have been like to design then, and then kick it back to modern times. And I was like the beneficiary of watching design take place again, partly in the past, in the present day, and even talking to my brother about what he's expecting coming down the road, which leads me to my question for you is, since the book was published, it seems technology is changing so quickly and affecting everything that we do. Has technologies, or how has technology specifically changed your view of design, especially the material in your book? Do you look at it differently now, 10 or 12 years later, because of technology, or has nothing changed for you?
Nothing changes. I'm not going to let it change my mind. Actually, there's a lot of challenges. I'm working with a colleague at Carnegie Mellon right now on the problems with AI. And there's a lot of damage being done by AI, and she's one of the top experts in robotics right now in the world. So, no, the principles in the book stay pretty constant. And the thing that happens with technology often is that it gets hidden by a green curtain. So if you know the Wizard of Oz, and there was this notion of you pull the green curtain back and there's the operators. So those technologies and those things, those algorithms, all those things are human created. And people have created those, and it's not exotic. It may be faster now that it's been before, or there may be more of it, but it's really like when I was first learning electronics, somebody said, just remember, it's like a big plumbing system. And everything that you know about a plumbing system, that's this electronics has too. So it has control valves, it works perfect even now, even when the electronics are so small that you can't see them. It's still the same principles underneath it all. It still has the same things that are operating, and it's still people. So even though you can become a billionaire doing something really stupid, it's just, it's people. It's not the technologies that's making it bad design or a good design. It's the people that's doing it. And to not sort of hold technology in this kind of reverence, somehow sacred thing. As it grows smaller and smaller, people seem to have sort of attributed it to some kind of a, I don't know, a God-like existence. It's not. It's just, it's a technology. And it's like a technology that's been with us for a long time and how we think. So there are things now I know for AI, and I make this distinction for myself between artificial intelligence and human intelligence. And there are things that AI can do better than people. It can play chess better. It can do all these things better. But that's just in a tactical domain, and people don't understand. It's what's called a finite game setting. And where the rest of us operate, where it really counts, in infinite games, where it's with strategics and all the rest of it, it doesn't do so well at all. So it's like now learning how to create a partnership between AI and human intelligence, so that, I mean, the industry likes to sell you the idea it can replace you or it can replace your efforts. No, that's not going to happen. What they have to do is make it so it's designed that you as a designer can use it for what you're wanting it to, you want it to do. And I mean, some of it is slick. I love my Apple computers and things. It's been great, but it doesn't replace. I'm not with the gang in California, can't remember the name, where it's going to be the computer and the human coming together, the Singularity group that thinks that the technology is going to become a biotech thing and it's going to be a singularity. AI, HI have got a partnership, and we as designers have to learn how to design the AI so that it supports us and doesn't replace us or try to replace us in the process.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Harold. Next up is Charlie, followed by Becky. Charlie.
Yeah, I really loved your book because it provided me with a perspective that I had no idea existed. So it was very enlightening. I am coming from a background that my interests are mostly in the design of social institutions or structures. And Richard Nisbet wrote a book called The Geography of Thought. And a lot of his work has been involved in the design of business structures that are where workers from both Asia and the West have to work together, and how they manage to find a middle ground, so to speak, with these different cultures. And for me, one of the things that I think is most important in the concept of design is contextuality. How do you decide context? Like some people have said, well, you just have to have who are the shareholders, okay, in the design. But it tends to be kind of human centric, and we end up in this sort of thing, the Anthropocene era, where we just kind of become very humanity has become just kind of obsessed with humanity, and have kind of left out everything, all other forms of life. And so one of the things that's true about the Asia is that they do have this larger view of a context in terms of a process philosophy. But because of things like Confucianism and filial piety and stuff like that, the end result is, I'm almost done, okay? Sure. It tends to, like Japan has one of the lowest numbers of Nobel laureates. So there's kind of this thing that's going on one side of the globe, and then the other side, you have people that are very individual centric, and they kind of get into this idea, it's all about me. I'm the great person who's designing all this stuff, and they don't really care about the larger context of the environment, and so we're ending up destroying the planet. And so it seems like if there was some way to bring these contextualities together, so that people could be creative in terms of trying to develop a eco-philosophy-based design concept, but without becoming subject to the herd mentality.
Thank you.
Do you have any thoughts about that?
So you want me to solve that?
No, I just want to get your thoughts on it. What do you think about it? I mean, has it something that has bothered you? Have you thought about it at all?
I guess the big part in all of that is that good design does not guarantee good design. So that you can be very good at designing, and you can be very clever and creative and everything. It doesn't mean you're going to create good design. Your intention may be even not to create good design. You may want to be extractive. You may want to take advantage of people, like in AI, things like that, where you control people with good design. I mean, some of that design in the technical world is just startling. And it controls people in a way that's totally against their best interests. So a piece of, and that's why I make the case in design, is that character counts in design for this reason, because as the designer, we choose, we make a judgment call about what we're going to treat as context and what is environment. And environment, for the way I work, environment is those things that you're not going to change or touch. You're going to leave them just the way they are. Context you can mess with. Context you can adjust and change. But it's our judgment call, what we decide that that's what's going to be involved in it, and what's going to be included. We make a call about what the system is, what its environments are, what its elements are, components, what its interrelationships are, what the entanglements are. We decide what that is, which means that in a big way, character really counts in design. So that part of our preparation as professionals has to involve this whole notion of ethics and responsibility and accountability and all of those things. We have to be held accountable. We hate, I mean, to go back to my role as an architect, we hate all these codes and everything we have to deal with when we're doing design work. Well, what those codes are is society's way of intervening and saying, no, you can't do whatever you want to do. You have to do it within these safety guidelines. You have to. So it's society's way of intervening with what could possibly be bad design from good designers. And as a designer, you hate to deal with that, but you understand that there are people, and I've had clients, owners tell me to do things that are totally unethical, illegal, unhealthy. And I've had to walk off projects because they wanted me to do something that I knew wasn't the right thing to do. It was not only that I'd lose my license, but it wasn't good for people. It was, so that's the challenge, is how do you get people to behave in the best way possibly, professionally, without overtly controlling whatever they're doing through codes, through all of these other things. Although that's what we do use a lot. And we have a lot of interventions like that. So, and we don't have enough, like future generations don't get enough representation in what we do. There's no voice for them. There are no codes for future generations. Some First Nations have that, but not the general populace, at least in the US. And that's the struggle. And it's like, because you come up with a really cool, good, slick way of doing design, doesn't guarantee that it's going to be good design. It still counts on the people. People still are key to it. So how do we deal with people? And there's a lot of people who call themselves designers, a lot of fields who have no kind of licensing. They have no kind of professional organization. They have no pressures from anything other than to do whatever the legal department says they can get away with and what the owner wants. So that's kind of a wild west one, where in engineering, architecture, you have a lot of people watching you, laws, regulations, licensure, all these kinds of things to sort of control your behavior. There's a bunch of fields out there call themselves designers who don't have that. And I think it really there needs to be more professionalization amongst people who are calling themselves and acting as designers.
Thank you. Thank you, Harold. Next up is going to be Becky. Becky, go ahead.
Okay, so I want to first thank you. Actually, it was Shrikant. He reached out to me and was like, oh, this is meetup if you need to join. And I'm like, I don't know anything about design. This is actually my first introduction and any kind of formal interaction with design. I didn't know anything about design theory. So it has been such a privilege, and for me to go from complete amateur and struggling through the concepts, referencing back and forth all the different chapters that mention things, struggling with the terminology. I think Joe and I would collaborate nearly every Monday. Like, what is it saying? And but like really seeing things click, and having things iterated. I draw many diagrams, and I remember texting Shrikant and Joe, oh, what about this? And week after week, things being updated, my concepts being updated, and like having that aha, like being applied to my past experience, as well as moving it forward. It was so enriching. And so I want to thank you for that. And I think for me to have your concepts and learn them in such a it allowed me to label things that that I perhaps have done in the past and had to learn through the hard way of trial, error, and reflection. But then also being able to take in the insights and all the warnings and the pitfalls from your chapters, and applying it forward was really just I guess it changed the way I've operated moving like forward. And that's exactly the I guess the subtitle. It was intentional change. So it was, I'm not sure if I'm being very clear about how much it has impacted me to be part of this learning process. And so one of the things I wanted to share was I know the pain point of like, okay, well, there aren't a lot of concrete examples, but in many ways, because it was so general, I was able to apply it not just to my work, which isn't architecture at all. So it was tech. It was I work with AI technology and people, but then I was also able to see where it was applicable in my studies with counseling and therapy, and I was also able to apply it with how I designed my room, which is a little bit more artsy, but also moving forward to such a personal level. I've taken a lot of these ideas with going back to Desiderata and Ideal to design like a lot of my future and how to pave that path forward. And now, so I've studied mathematics. A lot of my approaches have been problem solving. And now reading this book, it's just like having that separation. When is it better to solve problems? When is it better to design? I concretely have seen myself I've caught myself saying, no, I'm solving a problem that doesn't even exist if you really go after what you want and make that your design. So it has been so enriching. And so thank you. I do have a question. And so for my work, I work with people, and it's taking technology to improve processes. And so everything that you said with technology deeply resonates with me, because you can't replace that judgment, that character, that soul with technology, especially with people responding to things and the complex system changing all the time. One of my hardest, I guess one of the pain points would be identifying interests and where, I guess if you have any suggestions about when to or how to identify interests that may be harmful in terms of character or derailing projects, that I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a big challenge, a huge challenge, especially in some fields where the people who are affected by what you're doing are removed. And so you're imagining maybe, or you have somebody imagining what it is that these people ought to have. So you have what I call surrogate clients. So the surrogates come in, or the focus group comes in and says, well, what would these people buy? What would they do? How would they behave? And that's a difficult thing to do if you can't actually listen to somebody and hear what they're trying to express, even if they can't express it clearly. And so it takes some time of being with people. And it's not a lot of people that can actually reach inside of somebody and really say, yeah, this would be really good for you. I mean, at a commercial level, like Steve Jobs was great at doing that. He didn't ask, nobody asked me if I wanted this laptop thing and all this other stuff. But he said, wouldn't that be great for you? Wouldn't you like this? This would be, yeah, you're right. Yeah. So there is the surrogacy there that can happen. And the problem is, like, if you're working with governments or you're working with large organizations, it's very difficult to actually get close enough to listen to people, what they're trying to say. Because if you've been in public planning or anything, if you've been to town meetings or anything, and you've asked people, something that's going to affect their lives, they have a difficult time expressing what's valuable, what they would like to do with their lives. I mean, it's this whole notion of Desiderata. We're not used to, as a society, talking about what we would like to see, what would be desirable. We're very good and very trained and rewarded for saying what's broken, what do we hate, what are we afraid of, what pisses us off, we can be very reactive almost immediately, and politicians use that, and that's what they talk about all the time, and not about what is desirable, and desirable being an indeterminate outcome. It's choose. You choose the direction you want to go. You choose what the outcome is. It's not given, but what is it? And we have a hard time actually dealing with that at any kind of level. And certainly when you're in industries that are creating products and services, it's even more difficult because you're so removed from the people that are going to be a part of it. So that for me is a big gap right now in how we're working, and how our designers have to become much more sensitive to that, and how you find, there are some people that can't come in and tell you what they want, like future generations. They can't come in and talk to you, or in a hospital setting, children who are sick can't come in and tell you as a sort of an adult way what they would like, what they would desire about their treatment. What you can't, so you have to find ways to create surrogates for us in the design.
Thank you, Harold. Harold, I want to check in with you. How are you doing? I know you're recovering from being sick. Do you need a break? Are you all right?
I'm okay.
Okay.
So
Excellent. All right, so let's continue. If you need a break at any point, just let me know. So folks, now let's move to mostly questions because we want to get through as many questions as people have. So we will go with Kevin, David S, Vanessa, Jeff, and Joe. Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you have questions. Kevin.
Thank you, Suranka. Thank you, Harold, for the opportunity to chat with us and answer a question. I very enjoy the book, and I also have a question. So one question is about booking the figure in P1, about one is like a wheel. We got a 22 spoke. What's the in the center? Just now you mentioned the principle, I guess, is related. What is the name if you want to name that center? I got a couple of questions related to, I'm going to post a question to save you time. You can pick answer or not.
Sure.
What do you describe as, the next question, what inspired you or encouraged you to write this book, The Design Way?
You know what? Let's go with that. That's an excellent question. I want to hear the answer to that question. Go ahead. Go ahead, Harold.
Okay. I got it. Next question you want me to post?
Yeah, you can go ahead and
maybe
type
the
it
same. Yeah, the question is what would you make change if you have a chance to rewrite this book? Thank you.
Okay, he's writing a new book. That will be the final question. But what inspired you to write a book?
I don't know, not being able to say no. So I never thought that I would ever be an author. I mean, I would tell people early on in my professional career that I became an architect because I could draw, but I couldn't write. And guess what I've been doing for most of my life is writing. And even as an architect, I had to write volumes and volumes. So I've been doing that. And then I took a bad turn and I got into teaching and took up with a bad crowd. And of course, then we had to write articles and things. And some of my heroes were well-known authors in the systems and philosophy and other fields. So I started writing articles and things, making presentations very cautiously. And I was making a presentation to this one conference, and there was a publisher in the audience. And he came up and he said, you know, I think you should write a book. And it would be equivalent to so-and-so's book in art. No, really, you should, and we'll publish it. Yeah. So I had never written a book, never thought of writing a book. And so I started struggling with it and looking around, and there was a young fella that had, as a student, I'd gotten to know. And so I said, Eric, why don't you come over to Seattle and let's work on writing a book. And he was an academic, and he loved writing articles and papers. Okay, so I started writing, and it turned out for me, it was a great thing because to have somebody to bounce your ideas off of was great. I couldn't have done it solo the first time. And pretty soon it was like we were an old married couple. We would answer one another's questions, and we would have questions before the other one could even think about it. And yeah, that's great. So it went as a collaboration, went very smoothly. And I pushed it maybe a little further than it would have been because I had this nervousness about being dismissed by the establishment, by the academy, because it was out of bounds. I mean, the whole idea was not the norm. It didn't fit into silos. It didn't fit into given. So I pushed that pretty hard. And yeah, we got the first.
Wonderful. You know, Laura has been raising her hand. Laura, you have a question? Please go ahead. Laura, you need to unmute.
Yeah,
though. Go ahead.
I guess, you know, since I come from the learn by doing school and so forth, and interested in whether there you have a set of meta strategies that sit behind this that you would help, you know, that young future designers might be learning to develop the dialogue in their head that would help guide them through, you know, planning stages that would carry them along, because it can be, you know, a mysterious road sometimes, and you need something to fall back on. And I think having that language in your head that belongs to you, that you can help guide yourself, would be helpful. And I was wondering if such a thing exists in your world for this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's part of what the whole notion of the design of the new design school is all about, is to try to begin to lay groundwork for that. It's interesting to me, and this happens even when I'm working with older students, professionals who are along the way, and sometimes they're easier to work with than the real young ones. But when you use these big words on them, like desiderata and that, they walk off later using it as if it's a real word, and everybody should know it. And I hear it in the hallways, and so they pick up, and it's like reclaiming a lot of our tradition as designers to go back in and understand what this notion of poiesis is, to make. I've had people who are out of industry, you know, business, in a masterclass, we'll ask them to make something, and they just fall apart because they've never made anything before. How do you take material? How do you pick material? How do you, what is this? This is not real, kind of, they've never had that. So if they don't understand poiesis and then genesis, how do you come up with a creative thing that you want to make? How do you do that? And it's just that we're not familiar with it so much anymore. It's been lost. The notion of Sophia, that wise hand, has been lost. And so it's going back and sort of reclaiming a lot of the traditions that we used to have. And then it's reinforcing, like I'm working on a project slowly that I call the Berkeley Bubble. And it's, when I was at Berkeley, there were these groups of people that were working on design and systems, and they were influencing one another, and they were from all over the campus. And there would be people who would show up from all over the world coming into seminars and that, who were being influenced by these ideas. It was incredible. And, you know, they could be Sir Jonathan something, or they could be somebody who was one of the award winners in physics, or just everybody. And they weren't within these predefined enclaves. And it was very powerful ideas. And somehow the Berkeley Bubble started to dissipate at the end of the last century. And I don't see a lot of it around anymore. And they were powerful ideas. They were great. I see something like wicked problems is a very popular thing nowadays. I see people using wicked all the time. They don't have a clue typically what Riddle was talking about when he said wicked problems. Now there's wicked everything. I mean, wicked is attached to everything. It's become jargon. And that's too bad, because there was some really solid thinking that went in there. So we have a lot of tradition, a lot of great ideas that we need to go back and reclaim and share with people, and share with the new designers who are coming in, who think this is a hopeless situation. This is, oh my God, it's so complicated. I can't ever do anything. Oh my God. And it's not. A lot of people have really thought about this actually for centuries, have thought about these things. It's just that it's not been passed along, and it was lost along the way for whatever reasons. I mean, nowadays, a big part of the problem, I think, is that we have this very short attention span. I forget what it is, 54 characters, whatever. You can only do or read something that does, and you're doing all this. What do you mean? That's why I was amazed with the book. You guys sat around and you've actually read the book carefully over months. What is this? I mean, I'm used to these people. Yeah, don't, give me a summary or, well, no, it was totally different. Gave me hope because the times now are so fast and superficial at some level that how to go back and claim some of that knowledge and that wisdom that people have and not let AI take it and stand in for it. How do we do that? So that's kind of the challenge now. And sometimes it's great working with the younger generations. That's great. But I really have found that I really like working with these kind of professionals in that have been banged up a bit, and they've got a lot of experience and a lot of frustrations and questions, and they're very serious. Like when I was undergraduate, professor, somebody would come in and say, class is dismissed, professor's not showing up. Hey, yeah, let's go have a beer. I've been at other places where there's older students and say, you can't make it, when are you gonna make it? When, tomorrow? When, can you make it later? I mean, there was no messing around. They were there to learn, and they weren't there just to perfunctorily go through these steps and stages of something called education. So
I like the quotation that education is wasted on the young, because
yeah.
they're taking in concepts at a point where they do not have the experience to understand them. They are not able to ground them. So they are just words and jargons in their minds, and doesn't really work that way. Whereas somebody who has some experience of doing the thing has an ability to actually see what does this idea mean and be able to express it, apply it. Thank you. Next up is going to be David S, followed by Vanessa. Vanessa had a fascinating question that she asked Robert, but we've deferred it for today. David S, go ahead.
Hi, well, thank you for joining us and helping us pierce through this dense forest. People have done a good job in thanking you, so I'll leave it to them. My question is sort of about the scoping of this book in terms of what it seems to exist on multiple scope levels, like the human being is homo designus, it applies to every personal individual. In a sense, you've talked how it applies to personal life. It's a lifelong effort once you are identifying as a designer, but we're also all designers all the time, because every act is an act of bringing something to be that wasn't there. So we're engaged in this in some way, whether we're aware of it or not. So this book is making us conscious of our process. And also, not only at a personal level, but a cultural level, we build the culture that we're part of, and we should see ourselves engaged in this process as designers, even if we're not talking here at this moment about our professional design career. It applies at all these levels, it seems, and you do sort of switch these levels. You talk, sometimes it sounds like you're talking at the professional level, sometimes we're talking to everyone about everything you're doing. It makes sense because this book addresses a lot of levels, and I think it does that in an effective way, although not easy, but these are hard questions. So let's say in a sense, we're talking about effective action, ultimate particular. Effective action in the world, per se. The precursors are always learning or discovering and, knowing where you're coming from and sussing out what's the present, the technical knowledge of what are the capabilities that are technically present. And so let's say we're all engaged in this. This book is helping us discuss that process and critique designs. So we look at a phone, an iPhone, we say, well, we're designing a phone or we're designing a society when we produce this product? This has kind of come up in this discussion. Technology transforms our lives and society. Part of that is pre-envisioned and intended, and some of it is unintended. That to me is sort of an important question. So when we talk about the iPhone, we could talk about it, and am I legitimate in you as design? We're talking about a design of a communication device
with capabilities for pictures and text and documents and messaging and meetings, you know, and being mobile? Or are we talking about it as a design, the design of something which is meant to suck in people and time and their eyes and profit from their data? You know, or is it both of those? You know, one is an unintended consequence, no, they're all built in, and how can we talk about this? Are we informed by this book and how to talk about the intentions of the entity that creates something and what tools they use to create it? So they create a technical device that has a social impact and profits them. So the consequences, known and unknown, does this give us a way to discuss it? Because I think the issue that is not heavily addressed is the word morality or ethics. It comes up, talk a little about the evil of design, but you know, there are a lot of things that we're paying the price for the designs of now, and our children and our children's children will be paying a lot of prices. So yes, character matters, but do we need a chapter in this book helping us develop that idea of what that character must confront, ultimate values, not desiderata. Okay.
Fantastic points, David. So I'll put it as a question, very simple question of iPhone. I think that kind of captured it very beautifully. When you think of design of an iPhone, do you think of it, is it proper to think of iPhone as something that gives you the services, like stores your photos, takes photos, allows you to communicate, browse the internet, keep in touch with people? Or is it something from the point of view of the people who make it? Like, is it something that's going to suck up people's time, want people to keep upgrading all of it? So how do you think of something like an iPhone? From what angle do you look at it? Go ahead, Harold.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty typical at least in the tech world nowadays, but it's true of automobiles. It's true of a lot of technologies that we've had. And again, and it took me a while to catch on, is that the people behind the green curtain are the ones that are designing. And the direction that the design is going, it's taking you in, depends on who they decide the clients are, who's to be served, and how is the success measured? What's the scale of measurement? Who are the decision makers? And most of that is out of sight of the people, at least in the product world and the service world, is out of sight of people. And so you get the narrative from the salespeople about what this is. This is for you, and you want this, and this is good for you. But if you want to know, you have to go talk to the designers and critique the design itself that took place behind the curtain. And it's astounding sometimes when you find out who the clients really are, who is really being served, who is really profiting from this, whose measurement is really in place, scale in place. And that's a tough kind of place to be in, at least in the US. And well, probably internationally as well, is to get into these design decisions. I tell people a lot, I tell architects even, I tell a lot of designers, I say, the most important design decisions are made way before you get the brief. Way before. Somebody decides these are the people that are going to be served by whatever this is. Now you may say, okay, let's call it a phone, because people know what a phone is, not a data collection device. They know what a phone is. It's like the iron horse. The Native American didn't know what an engine was, a locomotive, but they knew what a horse was. So they could say, oh, okay, this is like an iron horse. Okay, yeah, okay, now we understand. So you can do the same thing with whatever else you're creating, and you can say, this is like this thing that you're very familiar with. This is like a phone. Well, of course, the iPhone wasn't at all like just a phone. It was a lot more. And as people who were creating and selling it discovered, they could turn it into a lot more than just a communication device and selling convenience and doing all these sort of things. They could make a lot of money selling data or tracking people or doing all these other things. And unless you're behind the green curtain with the designers that are making these decisions, you don't know. You have to guess. Okay, who's really getting served by this? I mean, making people paranoid nowadays. It's like, okay, why was this really done? You know, what are the Russians really up to? Why are they in Belarus right up there? What's going on? You know, everybody's trying to guess what's happening. And as a designer, I guess you don't limit yourself to just whatever's in front of the green curtain. You have to make and be a part of the design decisions that are being made behind the curtain. You have to. And somebody just sent me an article. Design is going to be moved up in the organization to a higher level. Yeah, that's not going to do it. It's got to be infused in a way that it's at the top and it's at the very top, and you have designers working it. It's not an activity that's going to get plugged in at another level of management or whatever as you're going along. So, and it is a huge challenge, very much an ethical, moral challenge. And it does take courage. I've seen people get into a lot of trouble calling out, okay, who does this really serve? And making it transparent. You can get into a lot of trouble doing that. You can politically, you can do it. Business-wise, military, you can get into a lot of trouble actually saying what this design is, what it's doing for whom, who loses, who wins. I mean, that's dangerous work. And a lot of designers, you know, don't like to be that dangerous.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Harold. Now, Vanessa, I really liked your question last time about the book. Go ahead. Vanessa, you need to unmute. Are you there? Okay. I don't know if Vanessa is here. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. She might have stepped away. Next up is Jeff. Jeff.
I had a minute there. So, Harold, thank you so much for this book. I've been rewriting my question as the conversation has gone along, which Shrikant always encourages us to do. And just, I spent a lot of time, Harold, with people who are behind a curtain, and consideration of stakeholders, both now and in the future, gets deep real fast. And even the sort of the appreciation that many of life's most important decisions have to be made with insufficient information, get used to it, is sort of a guiding principle. I'd like to offer to you just one thing, that if you ever decide to start a rock band, the Entanglements would be a great name. But sort of, that aside, I put my, this is my question. So I wonder if there are aspects of the design way that are particularly important when designing evolving systems as opposed to buildings, such as partnership between organizations to reduce homelessness, or a partnership between nations to slow global climate change. Really evolving, live, changing systems, as opposed to some inanimate thing, where once it's done, it's kind of done. And then the second is, do you have any guiding principles or practices when the members of a design team disagree with each other on some things that feel very important to them.
Thank you, Jeff.
So I'm going to ignore the second one for a while. So anyway, for your first one, that's a good question, because the focus of design changes dramatically based on what you're designing. So for instance, when I was talking about Len Doole's design of a seed for health, that was not a particular detailed piece. It was just a seed of an idea. It grows into things. So you design a seed to intervene in a social system that whatever emerges will have the values in that you want, but you don't design in detail. As an architect, you have to design in detail, because you have to make damn sure that that piece of reinforcement steel is where it's supposed to be before they dump the concrete in. And you have to have exactly, everything has to be detailed. So architecture buildings are a very different thing from doing kind of a political or social design. And one of the things, and that there are different levels. So one of the things that are very popular nowadays for people to talk about is complex behavior of social systems or living systems that can do a lot of very complicated things with very few rules. It's called flocking and swarming, and I guess that's enough. Anyway, they found like a flock of birds, starling, all the rest, they can exhibit very, very complex behavior. They can avoid obstacles. They can avoid predators. They can do all sorts of things. And there is no flock policeman there telling them what to do. There's no flock CEO saying, do this, dress this, come in. None of that. What it is, it's like 3 to 4 rules of relationship that they have between themselves. And you don't even have to have the rule of relationship with everybody. It's just your closest flock mate. And if those rules are kept in place, then you get incredible behavior out of that with a very simple sort of what's called cybernetic control of on each individual. And you can do, then when you go from rules of relationship, you can go to another level to get a social system to go certain ways, like the leverage points to enter into a social system to get the biggest bang.
Harold, may I interrupt? I want to give you an example.
Yeah.
So for example, these meetups that I've been doing are based on 4 rules.
Yeah.
Okay, I came up with it, I stumbled onto them the first meetup I did 5 years ago. So very simple rules. First rule is raise your hand when you want to speak. Second rule is keep on topic. Third is be brief or concise. And fourth is be courteous. And what happens is that once these are very simple rules, and not everybody actually wants to keep them, but those who want to keep them, the kind of this camaraderie that you see, that's the result of it. It's very simple rules that produce this amazing kind of interaction.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it works. It works tremendously, and it's fundamental to group behavior. It's how you get a group to behave in a certain way. So I use an example of an airplane, for instance, is that before you fly the plane, you walk around and you check things on it, make sure propellers go around and the wheels are on the ground and all that sort of thing. So you make sure that it's an integral, unified, whole system that's going to behave in a certain way. It has everything there, but it's not going anyplace. It's not doing anything. It has no mission. That takes the crew, that takes a flight plan, that takes airports, that takes all these other things. So for a social system to do more than just flock, then you have to have this added level of intervention where you bring in who can give this thing direction, who gives it purpose, who gives it the notion of service, who gives it, what's the payload, where is it going? What is it dependent on? What are the other things that are going? So as a designer, you can work on those rules of relationship and make sure that they're in place and that you've got the social system is going to behave. Like Bob and I worked on this with people on the formation of teams. How do you form a good team so it has diversity and all these other things in it? Well, you can do it with very simple rules. Very simple rules. Doesn't mean that the team's going to get anything done unless you have another level of intervention and that you have another way of bringing in direction and purpose and all the rest of it. So
beautiful. Now, next question by Vanessa, and then we will go to the final question about Harold's new book. Vanessa, go ahead.
Mr. Krang, I'm glad you mentioned CJ. I had actually attended most of his discussions on the book years ago in a different group. And it was my impression that the content seemed a bit abstract at times and even ambiguous. I wonder if this was on purpose to maybe help the reader develop maybe inadvertently a personalized, customized appreciation for the galaxy of design. You know, was that planned that way? So you kind of like in math, we have something called guided discovery. Like you don't realize, oh my gosh, you know, I get it. It's like click, so much better than simply I'm going to pass a test and I got the test right. But as far as for applying it, that's a different story. I try to keep it short, Shrikant.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely at least my hope was that the book would get people to think in a different way, not to think about something different. So it was thinking differently rather than just thinking about different stuff. And that was, like you say, it's probably not as common for a lot of folks, and there is ambiguity and all these things, but that leaves possibility, that leaves openness, that leaves the freedom to make the decision about how to engage, where to take it. And freedom is a central part of design and how you make judgments. So the book was certainly not meant to ever be any kind of like recipe book. And I have somebody I've experience with, very well-known designer. He would have his books printed on Bible paper because he wanted his book to be treated as a holy book. And it was, by thousands of people would treat this book as the recipe, as the answer. Did not want that at all, not at all. So.
Wonderful. All right, final question. We are a little bit sad that we have finished the book, but I'm delighted that you're writing a new book. So can you tell us a little bit about the new book? Because we would love to do this again with the new book, please.
Yeah, love to have you all do it. Yeah, this is project, it's like a pregnancy that is in its 9 months, and it really should have been over several months ago. So I really need to get it finished now. And the new book, the working title is The Design Mind. And I'm interested in, it's not like I'm rewriting the old book or anything. The old book was kind of a marker. It was kind of a mile marker, and it told me, are you going in the right direction or not? And yeah, okay. There would be, if I did a 4th edition or something of the design way, there would be things I would add and change, certainly. But the new book isn't up to that. It's about how we animate intention. And this is going to be, I don't know, for Maritza and the others that really caught on to this notion of intention. This may be a little dangerous for me, but what I've done is I've come up with two different ideas about intention. And one is intention spelled with a T, and one is intention with an S. And the intention with an S is aim or direction. And what I found at some point was that intention, an early definition of intention is when you drew the bow. And that was intention. It was not hitting something out there. It was not the target. It was the act of drawing the bow and getting into intention. And then you would have aim. And in the Zen tradition, it turns out, in the archery, it's like they say the target will only appear when you have brought yourself to intention. Then the target appears. But you don't, like so popular with Western businesses now, you don't aim at stuff. That's not the point. The point is not to hit targets. The point is to get intention. Aim, and then the target appears. So, intention with an S is the aim. Intention with a T is the purpose. That's the outcome. That's the target. That's what you want to hit. If you're not going in the right direction, there are some things you can never hit as targets. They'll never show up because you're going in the wrong direction. You don't have a chance. So that's a couple of things that wanted to introduce. It's not the only ones, of course, but it's a couple of things. And it's like the origins of design. Design, there are artifacts that are over 3.2, 3.4 million years old, give or take a couple of weeks, that show that we had design activity going on before we had modern humans. What is that? What is that force that started with us back in our pre-ancestry that said we needed to make things that would augment who we were? What Freud called the prosthetic God. What is it that we wanted to add on to us that we weren't born naturally with that would take us further? So the origins of design, the story, the notion of how we become and how we be designers, that's a part of it. And the notion of, and I'm not going to go through everything, it's just some of the things that came to mind is feed forward. So you're all familiar with feedback, and you've probably been told that you need feedback or you need to give feedback, and there's positive and negative feedback. It's a big deal in systems, different kinds of systems, how you control it, where it's going. As its targets, you set targets for it to get to, so you get feedback. What happens with something called feed forward when there is nothing set already for you to go towards? What is that feed forward? What's moving? It's something we call a strange attractor. What is it that draws us out into a certain direction to do things when there's not things already given for us to aim at? What is that? That's an incredible sort of thing that we're working with and we live with on how we cause reality to come into existence in the way we do, and what kind of reality we cause to come into existence. It's that strange attractor. What is that strange attractor in us? And it's grown stronger, I believe, of course, as we've evolved over time and as we've developed it and we've gotten better at it. And it's been said tonight, it's when we create something, it in turn recreates us. So whatever we recreate will recreate us. So there is this feedback loop that we were in as designers, as societies, as cultures. And so that strange attractor is growing stronger, and we really got to get smarter about what it is and how we're working with it, because we've gotten ourselves dug into a pretty deep hole in a lot of places because of this ability to create reality and the kind of realities that we've created. So how do we work with that strange attractor? How do we know what it is? How do we listen and follow and respond to its pull, and not the push of a problem or something from behind pushing us into something? How do we allow ourselves to get pulled into something? And I like to tell people, and probably told you guys, repeating myself, design is like laying track for a moving train while you're on board. So what does that mean? Other than just, a nice saying that you can put on your dorm wall or something, what does that really mean for your work? Which is a part of this strange attractor. It's part of the feed forward. It's a part of things dynamically moving in place, and you are aiming it, and you're moving, and you're on board. I mean, you're not standing aside. You're in the system, moving. So, yeah, and then there's another piece, and then I'll let you guys go because it's past your bedtimes. Another one that I am interested in, there's a lot of different things that I want to cover, but one is the notion of conjunction and it's this idea that, I forget who said it now, it's like one and one are two. So we're pretty sure we know what one is and we know what two is, but what we really need to know is what and is. And in conjunction, like we can have and when it's a summation, or we can have and when it's an also, like, yeah, this is also something that's going on. Yeah, okay. And then there's the summation piece, the kind of design pieces. When you have a conjunction of things, you have something totally different. Something totally different emerges. And I really try to discipline myself because people really like dualities, they like oppositions, they like a lot of that. And whenever they have an idea that they would like us to try, or what do you think about it? Instead of saying no, not, it's like, what if this was conjuncted with this? What would emerge from that? What would happen with that? I mean, hydrogen, oxygen, you get wetness. From wetness, you get ice and snow, and running water, and snow and waterfalls, all that. What would you get from a conjunction of these two things that seem so different? So, yeah, that's enough.
That was fantastic. I have to say that that's one of the core principles of improv comedy. Yes, and
yeah,
you take everything that somebody is giving you, and you say yes to it, and you add your own piece, and you keep doing that back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and something amazing happens as a result of that. Harold, this was just simply delightful. Oh, by the way, when is the book coming out? I'm sorry, it's a very tough question. Toughest question of all.
About 9 o'clock. It'll be in the morning, probably on my.
Okay. Yes. But look forward to it. And as soon as it comes out, we will go ahead and start reading it. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
And thank you, Shrikant. And thank you, everybody. Really, really appreciate everything. This was a great experience. I'm going to miss all this.
Yes.
I'm going to have to go see a counselor or something. How am I going to deal with this?
We will be back, and you're welcome here anytime. I love talking to you. Everybody loves talking to you. So you're welcome.
We can record them all so you can play them back all you need.
No. Recording is no good. You know, it's living thing. Yeah. David, didn't you hear? It has to be a moving automobile and you have to be doing tracks. How do you do that with the recording? It's too much dead.
We'll be back. We'll be back.
Yes, we'll be back. See you,
All right.
folks.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for everything, folks. You guys have done a fantastic job on this book. It's really remarkable what each person did here, and it is that what brought everything together here. So thank you very much, everybody, and thanks, Harold.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye. And special thanks to Robert. Robert, you were wonderful presence throughout. It's great that you just jumped in last time and were able to answer all the questions. But it looked like these were the true answers, Robert, though. Just kidding. Sorry about that, Robert.
I'm gonna have to live with him, from now on.
Oh, okay. So sorry to get you in trouble here.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Bye, everybody.